Hey y'all, tonight we drift somewhere you've probably never been, unless you've got a time machine, a canoe, and a questionable sense of self-preservation. Picture this. The moon is a silver coin caught in tangled willow branches. The air smells like wet earth and crushed marigold, and you're gliding across a lake that shouldn't exist toward a garden that floats. Welcome to the oddly calm world of Aztec Chinampas, floating gardens that bob gently in the night, their edges stitched with reeds, their shadows deep enough to hide a jaguar, or, more likely, a very cranky duck. You probably won't survive this if you try it in real life, but hey, that's what bedtime stories are for. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is, because somewhere it's always midnight in Xochimilco. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squat low in a canoe, knees tucked as it rocks gently beneath you. The water is black as obsidian, reflecting a sky so star-filled you almost forget the city that will one day swallow this place whole. The only sound is the soft dip of your paddle and the distant, mournful call of a night heron. The air is thick with mist, cool, damp, and laced with the scent of living things. It's the kind of night that makes you wonder if the gods are watching or just napping somewhere in the reeds. You drift past islands that shouldn't be there, patches of earth floating on the water, anchored by willow roots and the stubbornness of ancient gardeners. The Aztecs call them Chinampas, and they're part farm, part miracle, part ecological flex. You see neat rows of maize and beans, squash vines curling like green fingers, and marigolds nodding their golden heads in the moonlight. Somewhere, a frog croaks, probably composing a sonnet about mosquitoes. Historians still argue whether the first Chinampas were born out of desperation or pure innovation. Some say the Aztecs pushed onto the marshy edges of Lake Xochimilco, had no choice but to grow food where land was scarce. Others suspect they just like the challenge. After all, why plant on boring old dirt when you can garden on a raft? Either way, you're here now, gliding past a floating patchwork that's fed a city of hundreds of thousands, all without a single tractor or TikTok gardening hack. A lantern flickers on a distant island, and you catch a glimpse of someone tending to their crops by moonlight. Is it a farmer, a priest, or just someone who can't sleep? You'll never know. The Aztecs believed these gardens were watched over by spirits, some benevolent, some less so. You try not to think about what might be lurking beneath the water, or whether that ripple was just a fish or something with more teeth. You pass a clump of reeds, their tips trembling as if whispering secrets. The lake is alive, but oddly calm. No motorboats, no distant sirens, just the ancient rhythm of water and wind. Somewhere, a coyote yips, and you wonder if it's laughing at you or with you. You reach out and trail your fingers in the water, half expecting to pull back a handful of gold, or maybe a salamander with a PhD in amphibian philosophy. As you glide deeper into the maze of canals, you notice how the Chinampas seem to float, but are anchored by willow trees planted at their corners. These ahuejotes, as the locals call them, are the unsung heroes of the floating garden world. Roots tangled deep in the mud, branches reaching for the stars. Without them, the islands would drift away, like your attention span during a particularly long Zoom call. You spot a cluster of white flowers, Axolotl, the water lily, sacred to the Aztecs. Legend says these lilies guide lost souls home, or at least give them something pretty to look at while they wait for directions. You wonder if you're lost, or just exactly where you're supposed to be. A sudden splash startles you, and you look down to see a school of tiny fish darting through the shadows. The Aztecs used to catch these by the basketful, drying them in the sun for snacks. Not quite Doritos, but probably less orange dust on your fingers. You float on, the city's future a distant dream, the past as close as the mud beneath your boat. The calm is deceptive. This world is balanced on the edge of change, innovation, and the occasional hungry heron. But for now, you're safe, drifting through a landscape that's both impossibly old and strangely new. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the gentle sway of the canoe lull you. The air hums with possibility, and maybe a mosquito or two. You wonder what secrets the Chinampas hold, and whether you'll ever see this place again. For now, you're content to float, to listen, and to dream. You blink, and the moonlight sharpens, revealing the true marvel beneath your feet, or, well, beneath your canoe's wobbly hull. The floating gardens don't just happen. They're built, layer by muddy layer, by hands that know the lake's moods better than you know your own phone password. You watch as a group of gardeners, calloused, quick, and probably better at teamwork than your last group project, haul reeds from the shallows. These aren't just any reeds. They're the backbone of the Chinampa system, flexible enough to weave, sturdy enough to support a small farm, and, if you're desperate, probably edible. Historians still argue whether anyone actually tried to eat them, or if that's just a myth invented by bored teenagers. You paddle closer, careful not to tip into the chilly water, and see the process up close. The gardeners start by staking out a rectangle in the lake, driving willow poles deep into the muck until they stand tall and stubborn. Then comes the weaving, thick mats of reeds, crisscrossed until they form a floating raft. It's not exactly IKEA, but it's got a certain rustic charm. Next, they shovel up lake mud, rich with nutrients, and, let's be honest, probably a few lost sandals from last year's festival. This gooey treasure gets piled on top of the reed mats, layer after layer, until you've got a platform solid enough to walk on, if you don't mind a little squish between your toes. You reach out and press your hand into the surface of a freshly made Chinampa. It's springy, almost alive, and smells like a compost pile that's just discovered aromatherapy. The Aztecs were masters of recycling long before it was cool. Every scrap of plant, every fish bone, every bit of kitchen waste found its way back into the garden. You can almost hear a distant ancestor muttering, "Waste not, want not," as they toss another handful of maize husks onto the pile. The gardeners work in rhythm, passing bundles of reeds and buckets of mud with the efficiency of a well-oiled assembly line. If that assembly line also occasionally stops to sing, gossip, or chase off a particularly bold heron, you catch snippets of conversation, complaints about the weather, jokes about the size of last year's pumpkins, and a heated debate over whether the rain god Tlaloc prefers marigolds or lilies. Historians still argue whether these work songs were meant to appease the gods or just drown out the sound of squelching mud. You notice a small altar at the corner of the Chinampa, decorated with flowers, feathers, and what looks suspiciously like a carved frog. The Aztecs believed these gardens were sacred, a gift from the gods and a responsibility to the community. Every new Chinampa was blessed before planting, just in case some particularly grumpy spirit was lurking in the mud, waiting to sabotage your tomatoes. You wonder if modern gardeners would have better luck with their zucchinis if they left out a few offerings, maybe a nice cup of coffee for the soil microbes. As the sun begins to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, you see the true scale of the floating gardens. They stretch as far as the eye can see, a patchwork quilt of green and brown, stitched together by canals and narrow walkways. Each Chinampa is a tiny world, carefully tended and fiercely protected. The Aztecs measured their wealth not in gold, but in the number and quality of their gardens, a fact that probably made tax season a little more interesting. You spot a group of children racing along the narrow paths between Chinampas, their laughter echoing across the water. One slips and lands in a patch of mud, emerging with a triumphant grin and a handful of wriggling worms. "Good for the soil," someone shouts, and the others nod in agreement. You can't help but smile. Some things never change, no matter how many centuries pass. A fisherman pulls his canoe through the reeds, expertly steering with a long stick. He pauses to check a woven fish trap, pulling out a fat, glistening axolotl. These strange, smiling salamanders are both a delicacy and a symbol of the lake's unique ecosystem. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs truly revered the axolotl as a god or just appreciated its taste with a side of salsa. You lean back, letting the gentle sway of the canoe lull you into a state of near hypnosis. The gardens, the water, the sky all blend together in a seamless tapestry of life and labor. You realize that every Chinampa is a testament to human ingenuity, a living reminder that even in the most unlikely places, people can create beauty, sustenance, and the occasional mud fight. As the morning mist begins to lift, you feel a sense of awe and maybe a little envy. The Aztecs turned a swamp into a supermarket, a marsh into a masterpiece. You wonder what other miracles are hidden in the mud, waiting for someone with a little patience, a lot of reeds, and a willingness to get their hands dirty. The sun yawns over the horizon, and suddenly the lake is alive. You're jolted awake by a chorus of bird calls, egrets, herons, and a duck with the self-confidence of a mariachi band. The air is crisp, tinged with the earthy perfume of wet soil and the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. You rub your eyes, and there it is, market morning on the Chinampas, a floating festival that makes your local farmer's market look like a sad row of limp kale. You glide your canoe toward the commotion, dodging a flotilla of flower-laden boats. Each one is an explosion of color, marigolds, dahlias, and lilies stacked high, petals trembling with every ripple. The Aztecs prized these flowers not just for their beauty, but for their spiritual power. Marigolds, or timpasuchil, were believed to guide the dead home during festivals. Historians still argue whether the market's flower frenzy was more about devotion or just really intense floral competition, because apparently, even in the 1400s, people loved a good bouquet off. Vendors call out from their canoes, voices bouncing across the water. Tamales! Fresh tamales! One woman shouts, waving a steaming basket. The scent of masa and chilies drifts your way, and your stomach growls loud enough to scare a nearby egret. You paddle closer, and she grins, handing you a tamale wrapped in corn husk. It's hot, spicy, and so fresh you can almost taste the sunrise. You try to pay, but she waves you off. Apparently, your confused tourist face is payment enough. You drift past a group of musicians perched on a wide canoe, strumming wooden instruments and singing in Nahuatl. Their song is bright and lilting, a melody that seems to coax the sun higher in the sky. Children dance on the banks, their feet kicking up sprays of water, while elders sit nearby, sipping a tolo and trading stories. You catch a snippet about a giant pumpkin that allegedly capsized a canoe last year. Historians still argue whether this is true or just a classic case of Chinampa exaggeration. The market is a sensory overload. Rows of squash, tomatoes, amaranth, and beans, all grown right here on the floating gardens. You watch as a farmer proudly displays a basket of shiny, black Xochimilco cactus fruit, offering samples to anyone brave enough to pucker up. The Aztecs were masters of variety, cultivating hundreds of different crops. You nibble a piece of amaranth cake, its nutty sweetness balanced by a hint of honey, and wonder why this superfood isn't in every modern smoothie. A canoe glides by, piled high with bundles of fresh herbs, epazote, cilantro, and something that smells suspiciously like a cross between mint and mystery. The vendor winks and claims it's for strength and romance, which sounds like a marketing strategy that would absolutely work on Instagram. You pocket a sprig just in case. You pause at a stall where a woman is weaving baskets from lake reeds, her fingers flying with practiced ease. She laughs when you ask how long it takes. Longer if you keep asking questions, she teases. Her baskets are works of art, sturdy enough to carry produce, light enough to float if dropped. You buy one, mostly because you're pretty sure you'll drop something before the morning's over. A sudden commotion draws your attention. A canoe tips precariously, and a cascade of bright orange marigolds spills into the water. The crowd erupts in laughter, and the victim emerges, dripping but triumphant, clutching a single perfect bloom. "For the gods!" he shouts, and everyone cheers. You can't help but join in, swept up in the easy camaraderie. Nearby, a group of children are racing tiny reed boats, each one decorated with feathers and painted stones. The winner gets a handful of candied pumpkin seeds and, more importantly, bragging rights until next market day. You remember your own childhood races, paper boats in puddles, sticks in storm drains, and realize some joys are universal. As the sun climbs higher, the market begins to wind down. Vendors pack up their wares, musicians play a final song, and the last tamale disappears. Not that you're counting, but you're definitely full. The boats drift away, leaving behind a mosaic of petals on the water, a fleeting reminder of the morning's magic. You lean back in your canoe, the sounds of laughter and music echoing in your ears. The Chinampas aren't just gardens, they're the heart of a community, a place where food, friendship, and a little friendly competition keep the world spinning. You close your eyes, letting the gentle sway of the boat lull you, and wonder what other secrets these floating gardens have to share. You drift away from the market's fading laughter, the water now shimmering with stray petals, and the occasional bobbing tamale wrapper. Eco-friendly, you hope. The gardens grow quieter, and the air thickens with a sense of the sacred. Here, on the Chinampas' edges, you spot little shrines peeking from behind rows of maize, stone altars, clusters of marigolds, and offerings that range from polished obsidian to what looks suspiciously like a frog wearing a crown. It seems the Aztecs didn't just farm here, they worshipped too, blending the practical with the mystical in a way that would make your local yoga studio jealous. You pause at a particularly elaborate altar, shaded by a willow tree whose branches trail in the water like green fingers. At its center sits a squat, frog-shaped idol, Tlaloc, the rain god, famous for his unpredictable moods and his fondness for all things damp. The Aztecs believed Tlaloc controlled the rains, and by extension, the fate of every Chinampa. Farmers left offerings of flowers, food, and sometimes even tiny clay figurines, hoping to curry favor and avoid a season of soggy disappointment. Historians still argue whether these rituals were strictly religious or also a clever way to keep the kids entertained on rainy days. You kneel beside the altar, feeling the cool mud squish beneath your knees. The air here hums with quiet energy, as if the gardens themselves are holding their breath. You remember hearing that every new Chinampa was blessed before planting, a ritual involving incense, song, and the occasional chicken, for symbolic purposes mostly. No need to panic. The boundaries between the earthly and the divine blur in this place. Every seed planted is both a prayer and a promise. A sudden movement catches your eye. A gardener, older than the willow itself, shuffles past, scattering flower petals and muttering under his breath. He glances at you, winks, and points to a row of amaranth, then to the sky. You get the feeling he's just explained the secret of the universe, but your Nahuatl is, regrettably, non-existent. Still, you sense the message. In this world, every plant is watched over, Every harvest a negotiation with forces you can't quite see. You wander on, passing more shrines, some simple, just a few stones and a handful of beans, others grand, with painted shells and feathers that shimmer in the light. You spot a tiny clay dog, its ears perked as if listening for divine instructions. The Aztecs believed dogs guided souls to the afterlife, and you wonder if this one is on break or just really committed to his garden duties. The gardens themselves seem to pulse with life. Bees flit from flower to flower, their buzzing a kind of low-key hymn. Dragonflies skim the water, their wings catching the sun in flashes of blue and green. You pause to watch a butterfly land on a stalk of maize, its wings patterned like a mosaic. The Aztecs saw butterflies as messengers from the gods, and you half expect this one to deliver a cryptic note. Water your beans, and don't forget to subscribe. You spot a group of children clustered around a shallow pool, their faces serious as they float tiny boats made from maize husks. One child sprinkles a pinch of salt into the water, a gesture you recognize from stories about appeasing lake spirits. Historians still argue whether these rituals were passed down from ancient times or invented on the spot by creative kids with a flair for drama. Either way, the sense of connection to the land, the water, and each other is unmistakable. You pause at the edge of a Chinampa, looking out over the endless patchwork of gardens and canals. The air is thick with the scent of earth and incense, the distant sound of a flute weaving through the willows. You realize that, for the Aztecs, the floating gardens were more than just a source of food. They were a living temple, a place where the sacred and the everyday mingled like beans and squash in a Three Sisters stew. A sudden gust of wind sends a shower of petals swirling around you, and for a moment you feel as if you're floating not just on water, but on the edge of another world. You remember the frog-shaped idol, the offerings, the whispered prayers, and you wonder what it would be like to live in a place where every harvest is a miracle, every meal a blessing, and every frog a potential rainmaker. You take a deep breath, letting the scent of marigolds and mud fill your lungs. The gardens are quiet now. The only sound, the gentle lap of water against the reeds. You close your eyes, feeling the presence of gods, spirits, and gardeners past and present, all woven together in the oddly calm world of the Chinampas. You kneel in the muck, squinting at the intricate patchwork beneath your knees. This is no ordinary garden. The Chinampas are a feat of ancient engineering, a living laboratory where mud, water, and sunlight conspire to outwit both flood and drought. You dig your fingers into the soil, half expecting to find a lost smartphone, but instead you discover roots, thick, tangled, and impossibly strong. The Aztecs weren't just farmers, they were eco-geniuses, centuries ahead of their time. Historians still argue whether their methods were the result of trial and error or some kind of divine download from Tlaloc himself. You peer closer at the layers. At the bottom, a foundation of woven reeds, still springy after years submerged in the lake. Above that, a rich, black mud dredged from the lakebed, teeming with nutrients and suspiciously wiggly worms. The Aztecs called this mud tlali, and it was their secret weapon, a never-ending supply of fertilizer that kept the gardens lush even when the rest of the land shriveled under the sun. You scoop up a handful and let it ooze through your fingers, marveling at how something so messy could be so miraculous. The genius of the Chinampa system is in its recycling. Every scrap of plant, every fish bone, every bit of kitchen refuse finds its way back into the soil. You spot a pile of corn husks and melon rinds at the edge of a plot, waiting to be worked into the earth. Nothing goes to waste here, not even the water, which seeps in and out of the gardens, carrying nutrients and keeping the roots moist. It's like a giant, floating compost heap, only with fewer complaints from the neighbors. You watch as a gardener, his hands stained black with mud, tends to a row of beans. He checks the leaves for pests, plucks a few weeds, and then does something unexpected. He scoops up a cup of lake water and pours it over the roots. The water seeps down, carrying oxygen and nutrients to the plants. The Aztecs understood that water was life, and they designed their gardens to drink deeply from the lake. Some modern scientists call this hydroponics with extra steps. You call it genius. A dragonfly buzzes past your ear, landing on a stalk of maize. You remember reading that the Chinampas could yield up to 7 harvests a year, an agricultural superpower that fed the massive city of Tenochtitlan. Historians still argue whether these yields were exaggerated by enthusiastic scribes, or if the Aztecs really did have the world's most productive backyard. Either way, you're impressed. You crawl along the edge of a Chinampa, peering into the canal that separates it from its neighbor. The water is clear, revealing schools of tiny fish darting among the reeds. These canals aren't just for show, they're highways for canoes, reservoirs for irrigation, and home to a host of edible creatures. You spot a fat axolotl lurking in the shadows, its feathery gills waving like a frilly collar. The Aztecs prized these salamanders for their meat, but also for their supposed magical properties. You wonder if eating one would give you the power to regrow lost limbs, or at least survive a Monday morning. You pause to watch a group of gardeners dredging mud from the canal, their movements practiced and efficient. They pile the mud onto the Chinampas, building up the soil and keeping the gardens from sinking. It's a never-ending cycle. Dig, pile, plant, harvest, repeat. The work is hard, but the rewards are obvious. Rows of healthy crops, baskets of fresh produce, and a landscape that seems to float on air. You notice a few oddities along the way. A scarecrow made from reeds and old cloth. A row of chili peppers hung to dry in the sun. A patch of amaranth growing wild at the edge of a plot. The Aztecs grew more than just maize and beans. Their gardens were a riot of colors, flavors, and textures. You spot tomatoes, squash, herbs, and even edible flowers, all thriving in the rich Chinampa soil. It's a feast for the senses, and you can't help but wonder what it would taste like. You reach the end of a row and stand, brushing mud from your knees. The sun is higher now, casting long shadows across the gardens. You take a moment to appreciate the view, a patchwork of green and gold, stitched together by blue canals and dotted with willows. It's a landscape shaped by human hands, but still wild enough to surprise you. You realize that the Chinampas are more than just floating gardens. They're a living system, a delicate balance of water, soil, plants, and people. The Aztecs understood this, and they built their world accordingly. You wonder what lessons we could learn from them, if only we were willing to get our hands a little dirty. You linger as the sun dips low, painting the Chinampas in gold and violet, and the world shifts from bustling day to the hush of evening. The floating gardens take on a dreamy, otherworldly quality. Shadows lengthen, and the air cools, thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint tang of wood smoke. You hear the first tentative chirps of crickets, and then, as if on cue, the whole place comes alive with the secret nightlife of Xochimilco. You paddle your canoe slowly, careful not to disturb the glassy water. The surface reflects the last streaks of daylight, and you spot the flicker of fireflies, tiny lanterns bobbing above the reeds. Their light is soft, almost magical, and you wonder if the Aztecs believed these insects were the souls of ancestors come to check on the night's harvest. Historians still argue whether fireflies played a role in Aztec rituals or if they were simply admired for their ability to outglow everyone at the party. A sudden, distant howl echoes across the water. You freeze, heart thumping, until you realize it's just a coyote announcing its presence to the moon. Coyotes are the unofficial night watchmen here, slinking along the banks and sometimes slipping onto the Chinampas in search of a midnight snack. You imagine one in a tiny security vest, clipboard in paw, making rounds and judging your gardening skills. The Aztecs respected these clever creatures, seeing them as tricksters and messengers, sometimes helpful, sometimes just out to steal your tortillas. You drift past a garden where the air shivers with the sound of frogs and toads. Their chorus is so loud, you almost expect them to break into a synchronized dance routine. Somewhere, a splash, a fish, or maybe a water snake, or, if you're lucky, an axolotl out for a moonlit swim. You remember that the Aztecs believed the night was a time when spirits wandered, and the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Every rustle in the reeds, every ripple in the water feels loaded with possibility. You can't help but glance over your shoulder, just in case a ghostly gardener is checking your weeding technique. You spot a cluster of candles flickering on a distant Chinampa. A family is gathered, their faces glowing in the soft light as they share stories and pass around bowls of steaming atole. The Aztecs marked the night with rituals and offerings, sometimes for protection, sometimes just for company. You wonder if the stories they tell are about gods, monsters, or just that time Uncle Cuauhtemoc lost his sandal in the mud and blamed it on a spirit. The insects are out in force now, and you slap at a particularly persistent mosquito. The Aztecs had their own methods for dealing with pests, burning incense, rubbing on herbal concoctions, and, according to one fringe theory, wearing a necklace of garlic and chili peppers. Historians still argue whether this was effective or just a way to keep your neighbors at a respectful distance. You let your canoe drift, lulled by the symphony of night sounds. The fireflies swirl around you, painting lazy trails of light. Overhead, bats swoop and dive, feasting on the insects that feast on you. You marvel at how the Chinampas support not just crops, but a whole ecosystem, a web of life that hums along, mostly unnoticed, until the sun goes down. A cool breeze stirs the water, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant flowers. You shiver, not from cold, but from the sense that you're part of something ancient and mysterious. The Aztecs believed that certain nights were especially powerful, times when the gods might walk among mortals, or when the veil between worlds was thin enough to let a little magic slip through. You wonder if tonight is one of those nights, or if you've just had too much atoll. You pass under a willow, its branches trailing in the water like fingers. For a moment, you think you see something move, a shadow, a spirit, or maybe just your imagination running wild. You remember the stories of ghostly figures gliding across the water, of voices whispering secrets in the reeds, of gardens that appear and disappear with the mist. You remind yourself that you're safe, that the only thing lurking in the shadows is probably a very confused duck. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the night wash over you. The coyote howls again, joined by a chorus of frogs and the distant laughter of the family on the Chinampa. The world feels both vast and intimate, a place where anything might happen and where, for now, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. You wake to the gentle slap of water against your canoe and the unmistakable aroma of breakfast wafting across the Chinampas. The morning is bright, the air crisp, and your stomach is already plotting its next move. You drift toward a bustling patch of garden where a family is preparing a feast, their laughter rising above the rustle of maize leaves. You're about to discover that the floating gardens aren't just a marvel of engineering. They're a 5-star kitchen too. You're handed a steaming bowl of atole, thick and sweet, flecked with amaranth seeds. The Aztecs revered amaranth, tiny, nutty, and packed with enough protein to make your gym trainer weep with joy. You sip, savoring the subtle taste, and realize this is breakfast with a side of ancient superfood. Historians still argue whether amaranth was more valued as a ritual offering or as a staple crop, but your taste buds are firmly in the more please camp. The family invites you to sit, and you're soon surrounded by platters of food, each dish a testament to the Chinampa's bounty. There's tlacoyo, thick, oval-shaped masa cakes stuffed with beans and topped with fresh herbs. You bite into one, the flavors bright and earthy, and immediately regret every bland sandwich you've ever eaten. Next comes a salad of tomatoes, squash blossoms, and chilies drizzled with a tart dressing made from Xochimilco cactus fruit. The Aztecs cultivated an astonishing variety of crops here: maize, beans, squash, chilies, tomatoes, and more. You wonder if they ever suffered from decision fatigue at the dinner table. A young boy brings over a basket lined with banana leaves, revealing what looks like a pile of golden, crispy snacks. You pop one into your mouth and crunch down, surprised by the burst of flavor. Someone grins and whispers, "Ahuautale, lake caviar." You freeze mid-chew as you realize you're eating the eggs of aquatic insects, a delicacy prized by the Aztecs and apparently by adventurous eaters everywhere. Historians still argue whether ahuatle was reserved for special occasions or just for people who lost a bet. You decide it's not bad, crunchy, nutty, and definitely more exciting than your usual breakfast cereal. The meal continues with tamales wrapped in corn husks, each one stuffed with different fillings: beans, chilies, amaranth, and even bits of fish caught fresh from the canals. The flavors are bold, the textures comforting, and you're struck by the creativity required to turn a floating patch of mud into a culinary wonderland. You try to imagine your favorite celebrity chef attempting a Chinampa challenge, and the mental image alone is worth a second helping. As you eat, the conversation drifts from gardening tips to family gossip. You learn that the best squash grows on the sunniest Chinampas, that the secret to perfect beans is a little extra lake mud, and that Tlaloc, the rain god, once received an entire basket of chilies as an offering, presumably to spice up his thunderbolts. Someone jokes that the real gods of the Chinampas are the grandmothers, whose recipes are guarded more fiercely than the city's gold. You're offered a drink of pulque, a frothy, mildly alcoholic beverage made from the fermented sap of the maguey plant. It's tangy, slightly sweet, and just strong enough to make you wonder if you should attempt a nap in the nearest hammock. The Aztecs believed pulque was a gift from the gods to be enjoyed in moderation, unless it was a festival, in which case all bets were off. Historians still argue whether pulque fueled more poetry or more regrettable dance moves. The meal ends with a dessert of candied pumpkin and honeyed amaranth, the flavors rich and comforting. You lean back, full and happy, watching the sunlight dance on the water. The Chinampas have fed you body and soul, their bounty a reminder that ingenuity and care can turn even the most unlikely places into a paradise. You thank your hosts, promising to remember the taste of ahuautl and the warmth of their welcome. As you paddle away, you realize the floating gardens are more than just a source of food. They're a celebration of community, creativity, and the simple joy of sharing a meal. You paddle away from the breakfast feast, your belly pleasantly full and your mind buzzing with new flavors. The sun is climbing, and the Chinampa are now alive with the sounds of daily life, laughter, splashing, and the distant thump of a drum. You drift toward a cluster of gardens where the real action is happening, the social heart of the floating world, where gossip travels faster than a canoe in a tailwind. You tie up your canoe beside a group of gardeners lounging in the shade of a willow. They're taking a break, passing around a gourd of pulque and swapping stories with the easy rhythm of people who know each other's business a little too well. You settle in, greeted with a nod and a sly grin. Clearly, newcomers are always welcome, especially if they look like they might have a juicy secret or two. The conversation is a patchwork of news and nonsense. Someone claims their maize grew taller than a temple last season, only to be outdone by a neighbor who insists her squash once blocked the canal. You realize quickly that Chinampa bragging is an art form, equal parts fact and fantasy. Historians still argue whether these tall tales served as friendly competition or subtle social currency, but you suspect it's a bit of both. After all, who wouldn't want to be crowned pumpkin royalty? A group of children dart past, chasing each other with bundles of reeds. They're inventing a new game, equal parts tag and obstacle course, and you can't help but laugh as one trips, rolls, and pops up grinning, face smeared with mud. The grown-ups watch fondly, occasionally calling out reminders. Don't squash the beans, and offering advice that's half serious, half joke. You're struck by how the Chinampas aren't just farms, but playgrounds, classrooms, and living rooms all rolled into one. You spot a circle of elders playing patoli, an ancient board game involving beans, colored stones, and a lot of good-natured trash talk. The players jostle for position, arguing over the rules and accusing each other of cheating with the kind of affection that only comes from decades of rivalry. You're invited to join, but after watching a particularly heated round, you decide to spectate. These folks play for pride, not just peanuts. Nearby, a group of women are weaving garlands from marigolds and dahlias, their fingers moving with practiced grace. They gossip as they work, discussing everything from the latest market scandal to whose son is courting whose daughter. You catch snippets about a mysterious new fish in the canal, a rumored visit from a wandering priest, and a pumpkin so large it required its own canoe. Historians still argue whether these stories are rooted in truth or simply a way to pass the time. But you're convinced that every Chinampa has at least one legendary tale. A young man arrives, carrying a basket of glossy red chilies. He's met with a chorus of approval and a few playful jabs about last year's mild harvest. He grins, boasting that this year's crop will melt your tongue and cure your cold. Someone challenges him to a taste test, and soon the group is locked in a contest of bravado, each person popping a chili and trying not to show the pain. You give it a try and instantly regret it. Your eyes water, your nose runs, and the group erupts in laughter. You're officially initiated. The social club isn't all fun and games. Between jokes and jabs, the gardeners share real advice: how to fend off pests, when to plant certain crops, and which offerings seem to please Tlaloc the most. You realize that knowledge here is communal, passed down through stories, songs, and the occasional cautionary tale about what happens if you forget to weed your beans for a week. You notice a prize pumpkin at the center of the gathering, its orange skin gleaming in the sun. It's the star of the show, the subject of endless admiration and a little envy. The grower accepts compliments with exaggerated humility, but you can tell he's already planning his victory speech for the next festival. You wonder if there's a secret to growing such a marvel, or if it's just a matter of luck, timing, and a little friendly sabotage from the neighbors. As the afternoon wears on, the group disperses, some to tend their gardens, others to nap in the shade, and a few to continue their chili contest in private. You linger, feeling the warmth of community and the gentle buzz of camaraderie. The Chinampas aren't just floating gardens. They're floating neighborhoods where every day brings a new story, a new joke, and, if you're lucky, a new friend. You climb back into your canoe, cheeks sore from smiling and tongue still tingling from chilies. You paddle away, already looking forward to the next gathering, the next game, and the next tall tale that will drift across the water like a promise. You paddle through the maze of Chinampas, your tongue still tingling from that last chili, and spot a group of gardeners huddled around a makeshift table. They're deep in conversation, passing around jars and bundles of mysterious herbs. You drift closer, curiosity piqued. This isn't your average garden club meeting. Welcome to the weirder side of Aztec self-care and horticultural hacks, where beauty routines and pest control sometimes overlap in ways that would make your dermatologist weep. A woman with a sun hat woven from reeds holds up a small clay pot and grins at you. Crocodile-Dung sunscreen, she announces, dabbing a bit onto her nose. You blink. Yes, you heard that right. The Aztecs, ever resourceful, mix crocodile dung with other ingredients to make a paste they believed would protect their skin from the harsh sun. Historians still argue whether this actually worked or just kept people at a respectful distance. Either way, you're suddenly grateful for your SPF 50, though you have to admit there's a certain earthy glamour to the look. Next to her, a young man demonstrates a homemade insect repellent, a bundle of burning copal resin and dried chilies, sending up fragrant, eye-watering smoke. He waves it around the garden, and you can't help but notice the mosquitoes giving him a wide berth. The Aztecs were masters of using what the lake provided: herbs for healing, flowers for fragrance, and apparently chilies for just about everything. You ask if the smoke ever backfires, and he shrugs. If the bugs don't leave, at least the neighbors will. You watch as another gardener rubs a paste of ground amaranth and honey onto her arms. She explains it's for soft skin and good luck in the harvest. The Aztecs believed that certain plants had both medicinal and magical properties, so why not combine your spa day with a little extra insurance for your beans? Historians still argue whether these rituals had scientific merit or were just the world's earliest influencer trends. You can't help but imagine an Aztec beauty vlogger. Today we're unboxing the new volcanic ash exfoliant, and wow, my skin feels like it could survive a solar eclipse. Nearby, a group of children are busy at their own experiments. They're making tiny boats from maize husks and painting them with a mixture of lake mud and flower petals. One child insists the mud keeps the boats afloat longer, while another claims it's just for decoration. You realize that, on the Chinampas, innovation is a community affair. Everyone's got a theory, and everyone's willing to test it, even if it means a few muddy mishaps along the way. You spot a scarecrow dressed in a tunic of woven reeds and crowned with marigolds. Its face is painted with a mixture of charcoal and, you suspect, a little leftover breakfast. The Aztecs believed marigolds could ward off evil spirits and pests alike. So why not give your scarecrow a fighting chance? You wonder if modern gardeners would have better luck with their tomatoes if they added a floral crown and a little attitude. A fisherman pulls by, his canoe loaded with baskets of lakeweed. He explains that the Aztecs used these aquatic plants as mulch, spreading them over the Chinampas to retain moisture and add nutrients to the soil. It's a simple trick, but one that keeps the gardens lush even in the driest seasons. You marvel at the ingenuity. Nothing goes to waste here, not even the weeds. Historians still argue whether this was a carefully planned strategy or just the result of centuries of creative problem solving. You linger as the gardeners share more tips: how to use crushed chili to deter ants, how to make a hair rinse from willow bark, and the best way to keep your canoe from sprouting mold. Hint, it involves more chilies. You realize that life on the Chinampas is a blend of science, superstition, and sheer stubbornness, a place where every oddity has a purpose, and every hack is worth a try. As the sun sets, you thank your hosts and paddle away, your mind swirling with new ideas. You make a mental note to try the Amaranth honey scrub, but maybe skip the Crocodile-Dung sunscreen, unless you're feeling especially adventurous. You glance back at the Chinampas, now glowing in the evening light, and wonder what other secrets these floating gardens still hold, just waiting for someone bold or bored enough to discover them. You paddle further down the canal, the evening breeze ruffling your hair and carrying with it a new, uneasy energy. The laughter and easy chatter of the day are fading, replaced by hushed voices and wary glances toward the horizon. Something is different. There's tension in the air, a sense that the world is about to tilt. You hear snippets of conversation, rumors of strangers, armored and pale, who have been spotted at the lake's edge. The Aztec floating gardens, so calm and self-contained, are about to face a storm they never imagined. You pull your canoe up beside a gathering of gardeners clustered around a smoky fire. Their faces are lit by the flicker of flames and worry. One man, older than the willows, leans in and whispers. They say the newcomers ride animals with hooves of thunder. A woman shakes her head, clutching her child, and they carry sticks that spit fire. You try to picture it: horses, guns, the first glimpses of Spanish conquistadors, alien and terrifying in this world of mud and maze. Historians still argue whether the first encounters were peaceful exchanges or tense standoffs, but everyone agrees. The news spread through the Chinampas like wildfire. You listen as the elders debate what to do. Some say the strangers are gods sent by Quetzalcoatl to test the people. Others scoff, insisting that no god would wear that much metal in the Mexican sun. You can't help but agree. Armor is a bold choice for a swamp. The children, wide-eyed, ask if the newcomers will bring gifts or curses. No one has answers, only stories, and the stories grow stranger with every retelling. You drift away from the fire, paddling through silent gardens where even the frogs seem subdued. The Chinampas have always been a place of innovation and adaptation, but now you sense fear creeping in at the edges. You spot a group of young men sharpening obsidian blades, their faces set with determination. The Aztecs were fierce defenders of their land, and you wonder how they will respond to this new, unimaginable threat. As you pass a shrine to Tlaloc, you notice fresh offerings, flowers, corn, and a little extra chili, just in case the rain god can be convinced to help. The people are turning to their old protections, hoping the gods will shield them from what's coming. You remember that the Aztecs believed in omens, and the appearance of strangers was often seen as a sign of great change, for better or worse. Historians still argue whether the omens truly foretold the fall of Tenochtitlan, or if hindsight just makes every cloud look like a prophecy. You pause at the edge of a Chinampa, watching as a canoe glides by, loaded with baskets of food. The people are preparing, stockpiling maize and beans, whispering plans for what to do if the strangers come closer. You hear talk of sending emissaries, of hiding the children, of reinforcing the gardens with extra willows. The community is rallying, drawing together in the face of uncertainty. A sudden commotion breaks the quiet. A lookout has spotted movement on the lake's far shore. Everyone tenses, eyes straining in the dusk. You catch a glimpse of something metallic glinting in the fading light, and your heart pounds. The newcomers are real, and they are close. You realize, as the night deepens and the stars blink awake, that the Chinampas are on the verge of transformation. The world you've come to know, lush, communal, oddly calm, is about to be tested by forces beyond its borders. You wonder what will survive. The gardens, the traditions, the jokes about Crocodile-Dung sunscreen. You hope that, whatever comes, the spirit of the Chinampas, their resilience, their ingenuity, their stubborn joy, will endure. You paddle back to your resting place, the sounds of anxious voices fading behind you. The water is dark and still, reflecting a sky full of questions. You close your eyes, letting the gentle motion of the canoe soothe your nerves. Tomorrow will bring change, but tonight, for a few more hours, the floating gardens are yours to drift through, suspended between worlds. You awaken to a world transformed. The air is thick with tension, the usual chorus of birds and laughter replaced by uneasy silence. The Chinampas, once a patchwork of calm and color, now bristle with activity. Canoes loaded with supplies, families whispering hurried plans, and everywhere the sense that something precious is slipping away. The invaders have come closer, and the floating gardens are under siege. You paddle through the canals, passing groups of men and women, reinforcing the edges of their Chinampas with fresh reeds and willow stakes. The Aztecs have always been resourceful, and now that ingenuity is being tested to its limits. You watch as they build barricades from mud and branches, transforming their peaceful gardens into makeshift fortresses. Historians still argue whether these defenses ever truly slowed the Spanish, or if they were more a symbol of resistance than an actual deterrent. Either way, the determination in every face is unmistakable. You hear the distant clang of metal, the unfamiliar bark of foreign dogs, and the sharp crack of weapons. sounds that have never belonged on these waters. The Spanish conquistadors, with their armor and muskets, are unlike anything the Chinampa farmers have faced. You spot a group of warriors, their bodies painted, obsidian blades glinting, as they prepare to defend their home. The Aztecs were fierce, but you can't help but notice the uncertainty in their eyes. This is a new kind of war, and the rules have changed overnight. You pass a shrine to Tlaloc, now piled high with desperate offerings, flowers, food, even a prized pumpkin. The people pray for rain, for protection, for a miracle. You remember that the Aztecs believed the gods could intervene in human affairs, and in times of crisis, every ritual takes on new urgency. Historians still argue whether these acts of faith brought comfort or only deepened the sense of helplessness. You suspect it's both. The canals are crowded with families fleeing deeper into the gardens, seeking safety among the reeds. You see mothers clutching children, elders carrying baskets of seeds, and young men ferrying supplies. The Chinampas, usually a place of abundance, now feel fragile, vulnerable, a paradise at risk of being lost. You overhear whispered plans to hide food stores, to send messages to allies, to resist in whatever ways they can. You come upon a group of healers tending to the wounded. They use every tool at their disposal: herbs, mud poultices, and prayers. The Aztecs were skilled in medicine, drawing on centuries of knowledge passed down through families. You watch as they work quickly, efficiently, their faces set with grim determination. The air is thick with the scent of crushed marigold and burning copal, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the old ways endure. Disease, too, has arrived with the invaders. You hear talk of a strange sickness sweeping through the gardens, fever, rash, and weakness that no herb can cure. Smallpox, brought by the Spanish, spreads faster than any rumor. The people are bewildered, terrified, and you see the toll in every weary face. Historians still argue whether the disease alone would have toppled the Aztec world, or if it was the final blow in a long, brutal struggle. You paddle past a group of children, their play subdued, their eyes wide with fear. One clutches a reed boat, another a doll made from maize husks. You realize that the next generation is watching, learning what it means to endure. The Chinampas have always been a place of teaching, and now the lessons are harder, sharper, but no less vital. You pause at the edge of a garden, watching as the sun sets over the embattled landscape. The water glows red and gold, reflecting a world in turmoil. You wonder what will remain when the fighting ends. Will the gardens survive, or will they be swallowed by the city that will one day rise here? Will the stories, the songs, the jokes about prize pumpkins and Crocodile-Dung sunscreen live on in memory? You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the night wash over you. The Chinampas are under siege, but their spirit endures, a testament to resilience, to community, to the stubborn hope that even in the face of destruction, something beautiful can survive. You drift along the canals in the aftermath, the world quieter now, as if the gardens themselves are holding their breath. The chaos of siege has faded, replaced by a heavy stillness. The Chinampas bear scars, patches of churned mud where barricades once stood, shrines toppled and rebuilt, and the lingering ache of loss. Yet, as you glide past, you notice something remarkable. Life persists. Green shoots push through the mud. Willows bend, but do not break. And the people, though changed, remain. You watch as families return to their gardens, reclaiming what they can. Some Chinampas are abandoned, their crops wild and tangled, but others are lovingly tended, rows straightened, and seeds pressed into the earth with quiet determination. The floating gardens have always been about adaptation, and now that spirit is more vital than ever. Historians still argue whether the Chinampas would have survived without the stubbornness of these post-conquest gardeners, or if the system's resilience was built into its very roots. You pass a group of elders, their hands weathered, faces set with the wisdom of survival. They share stories of the old days, of gods and festivals, of battles lost and won. You realize that memory is as much a part of the Chinampas as mud and maize. The children listen, wide-eyed, absorbing the tales like sunlight. You wonder if they'll remember the jokes about prize pumpkins or invent new ones about the time someone tried to outrow a Spanish galleon in a reed canoe. The city of Tenochtitlan is gone, replaced by the sprawling chaos of Mexico City. The canals shrink, filled in to make way for roads and buildings. But here and there, the Chinampas endure. You spot a patchwork of gardens clinging to the edges of Xochimilco, stubborn as ever. The air buzzes with the sound of insects and distant traffic, a strange duet of old and new. You marvel at how the floating gardens have survived, shape-shifting through centuries of change. You pause at a ruined shrine, half swallowed by reeds. Someone has placed fresh marigolds there, a silent promise that the old ways are not forgotten. The Aztecs believed that the land remembers, that every offering, every story leaves an imprint. You kneel, feeling the cool mud beneath your hands, and sense the layers of history pressing close, triumph, tragedy, and the quiet miracle of endurance. You meet a modern gardener, her hands stained with earth, her smartphone tucked into her belt. She tells you how her family has tended these Chinampas for generations, passing down seeds and secrets. She points to a patch of Amaranth, explaining how it's both ancient and new, a crop that fed emperors and now stars in trendy health food bowls. You laugh together, sharing a moment of connection that bridges centuries. Historians still argue whether today's Chinamperos are the true heirs of the Aztecs, or if the gardens have become something entirely different. You suspect the answer is both. You spot a group of school children on a field trip, their teacher explaining how the Chinampas work, how they float, how they feed the city, how they once covered the entire valley. The kids listen, some bored, some fascinated, one or two sneaking glances at their phones. You hope they'll remember the feel of the mud, the scent of marigolds, the taste of a sun-warmed tomato plucked straight from the vine. You drift past a patch of wild Chinampa, untamed and lush. Birds nest in the willows, dragonflies dart over the water, and the air hums with possibility. You realize that the gardens are more than a relic. They're a living link, a reminder that even in a world of concrete and chaos, there is room for resilience, for beauty, for the oddly calm persistence of life. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the present mingle with echoes of the past. The Chinampas have survived war, disease, and the relentless march of progress. They are battered but not broken, changed but not erased. You wonder what the future holds. Will the gardens thrive, or finally slip beneath the waves of history? For now, you are content to float, to listen, and to hope. You paddle onward, the canals narrowing as the city encroaches, and find yourself in a world where the ancient and the modern collide in the most unexpected ways. The Chinampas, once the backbone of an empire, now pop up in places you'd never expect, on movie screens, in memes, and in the backgrounds of countless tourist selfies. You realize that the floating gardens have become more than a relic. They're a cultural icon, shape-shifting to fit the stories people want to tell. You spot a film crew setting up on a particularly picturesque Chinampa. Bright lights, drones buzzing overhead, and a director in sunglasses barking orders. Apparently, today's scene involves a dramatic canoe chase with a suspiciously clean actor who's clearly never paddled through real Chinampa mud. The Aztecs might not recognize the plot, but they definitely appreciate the spectacle. Historians still argue whether these pop culture portrayals help preserve the garden's legacy or just turn them into backdrops for romantic comedies and action flicks. Either way, the Chinampas keep stealing the show. You drift past a group of tourists, phones out, snapping photos of every flower, duck, and decorative canoe. One woman strikes a pose with a garland of marigolds while her friend tries and fails to balance on the edge of a wobbly boat. You can't help but smile. Some things never change. The Chinampas have always been a place for showing off, whether it's a prize pumpkin or a particularly daring selfie. You wonder if the ancient gardeners would have gone viral with their tales of floating squash and Crocodile-Dung sunscreen. #Chinampa challenge. Anyone? You overhear a tour guide explaining the history of the gardens, weaving together fact and legend with the flair of a seasoned storyteller. He points out the willows, the canals, the patches of wild amaranth, and throws in a few ghost stories for good measure. The group listens, wide-eyed, as he describes the floating farms that once fed an empire and the spirits that still haunt the misty waters at night. You realize that the Chinampas have become a canvas for imagination, a place where the past is always just a story away. You spot a street artist painting a mural on a crumbling wall, his brush strokes turning concrete into a riot of color. Maize, marigolds, and dragonflies swirling around a stylized Chinampa. Kids stop to watch, some joining in with spray cans and sidewalk chalk. The scene is both timeless and new, a reminder that the gardens still inspire creativity, even as the city presses in from all sides. Historians still argue whether these modern tributes honor the true spirit of the Chinampas or just romanticize a vanished world. You suspect it's a bit of both. You pass a souvenir stand where vendors sell tiny reed boats, painted frogs, and t-shirts emblazoned with slogans like "Keep Calm" and "Chinampa On." You chuckle, imagining an Aztec farmer rolling his eyes at the merch. But you can't deny the charm. The gardens have become a brand, their image floating far beyond the canals of Xochimilco. You check your phone, because even in a dreamscape, old habits die hard, and scroll through photos tagged at the gardens. There are wedding parties in flower-crowned canoes, musicians serenading the sunset, and the occasional dog in a tiny life vest. You realize that the Chinampas have found a new kind of immortality, living on in pixels and hashtags, their story retold every day by people from around the world. You pause at the edge of a garden, watching as a group of teenagers film a dance routine for social media, their moves echoing the rhythms of ancient festivals. The music is different, the clothes flashier, but the spirit is the same. A celebration of life, of place, of the oddly calm magic that floats just beneath the surface. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of laughter, music, and distant traffic blend into a single, timeless hum. The Chinampas have become part of the world's imagination, a symbol of resilience, creativity, and the power of a good story. You wonder what the ancient gardeners would think of it all. Would they be proud, amused, or just a little confused? Maybe all three. You drift away from the painted walls and selfie-snapping tourists, deeper into the quieter reaches of the canals, where the water grows still and the air is thick with possibility. Here, the Chinampas aren't just a backdrop or a memory. They're the focus of a new kind of experiment. You notice clusters of scientists and dreamers, their canoes packed not with marigolds, but with measuring tapes, notebooks, and the occasional drone buzzing overhead. The floating gardens are having a renaissance, and you're about to witness the science of rewilding in action. You pull up beside a team of ecologists kneeling in the mud, their hands deep in the roots of a freshly planted willow. They explain, with the enthusiasm of people who truly love mud, that they're restoring old Chinampas using both ancient and modern techniques. Their goal? To bring back the biodiversity that once made these gardens a paradise for birds, fish, and humans alike. Historians still argue whether the original Chinampas were as ecologically perfect as some claim, or if nostalgia has made the past a little greener than it really was. Either way, the work is real, and the mud is definitely authentic. You watch as a researcher gently releases a handful of tiny axolotls into a canal, her face glowing with hope. The axolotl, once nearly extinct in the wild, is making a cautious comeback thanks to projects like this. You can't help but root for the little guys. After all, who wouldn't want to see a smiling salamander reclaim its home turf? The scientists joke about axolotls as the unofficial mascots of the rewilding effort, and you wonder if they'll ever get their own reality show. Keeping up with the amphibians. Nearby, a group of local farmers, Chinamperos, work alongside the ecologists, sharing knowledge passed down through generations. They swap tips on composting, water management, and the best way to keep invasive species at bay. Spoiler, it still involves a lot of chilies. The collaboration is easy, a blend of old wisdom and new science. You realize that the future of the Chinampas depends on this partnership, on people willing to listen, learn, and get their hands dirty. You spot a floating garden that's been left wild on purpose, a tangle of reeds, flowers, and native crops. Birds flit through the branches, frogs croak from the shadows, and dragonflies skim the surface. This isn't neglect, it's strategy. The ecologists explain that rewilding means letting nature take the lead, allowing the ecosystem to heal itself with a little gentle guidance. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs would approve of this hands-off approach, or if they'd be out here with a hoe and a stern lecture about lazy gardening. You listen as the team discusses their challenges: pollution from the city, disappearing water levels, and the ever-present threat of urban sprawl. It's not easy, and the victories are often small. A new bird nest here, a patch of clean water there. But every success feels monumental, a sign that the Chinampas can still adapt, still surprise, still thrive. You're reminded of the stubborn resilience that's always defined this place. A young student shows you a map of the area, dotted with hopeful green patches. She explains that each restored Chinampa is a stepping stone, a piece of a larger puzzle that could one day reconnect the fragmented wetlands of the Valley of Mexico. You imagine a future where the city and the gardens coexist, where school children learn to paddle canoes before they learn to drive, and where the axolotl is just another neighbor, not a headline. You paddle away, the sounds of scientific debate and laughter fading behind you. The sun is setting, painting the water in shades of orange and pink. You realize that the story of the Chinampas isn't over. It's being rewritten, one muddy handful at a time. The floating gardens are still a place of innovation, still a laboratory for hope, still oddly calm in the face of everything the world throws at them. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent of wet earth, wildflowers, and possibility. The Chinampas are rewilding, and so, maybe, are you. You let your canoe drift, the paddle resting across your knees as the last light of day shimmers on the water. The Chinampas stretch out around you, a patchwork of green and gold, their edges softening in the twilight. You feel the gentle rock of the boat, the hush of evening settling in, and you realize you're not just floating through a landscape. You're gliding through centuries of adaptation, community, and calm. You pass a gardener kneeling in the mud, planting seeds with the same careful reverence you saw in the stories of old. There's a quiet pride in her movements, a sense that every handful of earth is a thread in a tapestry that stretches back to the first Chinamperos. She looks up, smiles, and gestures for you to come closer. You watch as she presses a tiny amaranth seed into the soil, her hands steady and sure. "We plant," she says, "because someone always will harvest." It's a simple truth, but it lands with the weight of history. You paddle onward, the air alive with the sounds of frogs, birds, and distant laughter. You pass a group of children racing reed boats, their shouts echoing across the water. The Chinampas are still a place for play, for learning, for the kind of joy that bubbles up even when life is hard. You remember the stories you've heard of prize pumpkins, of midnight feasts, of Crocodile-Dung sunscreen, and chili eating contests. The gardens are a living memory, their traditions carried forward not just in rituals, but in jokes and games and the everyday acts of care. You pause at a shrine, its stones warm from the sun, the scent of marigolds lingering in the air. Someone has left a fresh offering, a handful of beans, a splash of pulque, a tiny clay frog. The old gods may be quieter now, but their presence lingers, woven into the fabric of the gardens. Historians still argue whether the rituals matter as much as the work itself, but you sense that both are needed: faith and effort, hope and hands in the dirt. You drift past a patch of wild Chinampa, its willows tangled, its flowers riotous. Birds nest in the branches, dragonflies skim the water, and the whole place hums with life. You realize that the greatest lesson of the floating gardens isn't just how to grow food on water, but how to live with change, how to adapt, to persist, to find calm in chaos. The Chinampas have survived floods, droughts, invasions, and the relentless creep of the city. They're a testament to resilience, to the power of community, and to the quiet magic of making something beautiful out of mud and hope. You close your eyes, letting the boat rock gently, the sounds of the Chinampas washing over you. You think of all the hands that have shaped this place: farmers, priests, children, scientists, dreamers. Each one has left a mark, a story, a seed planted for the future. You wonder what the gardens will look like in another 100 years, what new jokes and rituals will take root, what old lessons will be rediscovered. For now, you are content to float, to listen, to breathe in the oddly calm world of the Aztec floating gardens. The journey has been long, winding through history and myth, science and story, but it ends here, in the gentle embrace of twilight, with the promise that as long as there are hands to plant and hearts to dream, the Chinampas will endure. The canoe drifts slower now, the world softening as dusk deepens into night. The last birds call, their voices gentle, fading into the hush that settles over the water. You feel the cool breath of evening on your skin, the steady pulse of the Chinampas beneath you, alive with memory and hope. Each ripple in the canal is a lullaby, each whisper of wind through the willows a gentle reminder that peace is possible, even in a world shaped by change. You let your thoughts float, untethered, as the gardens blur into shadow and silver. The air is thick with the scent of earth and flowers, and the distant laughter of children lingers like a blessing. The stories of the Chinampas, of resilience, of community, of finding calm in the unexpected, settle quietly in your mind. You feel the weight of centuries lifting, replaced by a sense of belonging, of being part of something enduring and gentle. With every slow breath, your body relaxes, your heart finds its rhythm, and the world narrows to the soft sway of the boat and the promise of rest. The floating gardens fade into the darkness, but their lessons remain. Adapt, endure, and let yourself be carried by the current when the day grows long. So, as you settle in, let the calm of the Chinampas wrap around you like a blanket. Drift, dream, and remember. Somewhere, the gardens are still floating, still blooming, still whispering their secrets to the night.